Stay with me. Don't you give up on me now. Stay with me.
The bullet left the gun before Sun Wukong's mind caught up with his hand. 1 second, he was staring down a warehouse full of smugglers through a scope, breathing steady, trained for war. The next, a woman in navy black stepped out of the shadows where she wasn't supposed to be, and his finger, trained by 10 years of survival instinct, moved before thought could stop it.
She dropped.
Sun Wu was across the concrete before her body hit the ground, before his brain even registered the scream tearing out of his own throat. He turned her over, and the world stopped breathing. Zola.
His wife.
His wife, whom he had married in secret 6 months ago in a chapel in Mombasa with nobody but a priest and the salt wind as witnesses. His wife, who was supposed to be on deployment in the Indian Ocean, safe, far from his other life, the life she never knew existed. His wife, who was 3 months pregnant with his child. Her hand, the one wearing the thin gold band he'd slid onto her finger, pressed weakly against the wound blooming red beneath her ribs. Sun Wu, she rasped, blood at the corner of her lips, eyes wide with a betrayal so much sharper than pain. You're the buyer they sent me to catch? He was shaking. Sun Wukong, CEO of Kong Holdings by day, heir to Seoul's most feared syndicate by blood, a man who had never once let his hands tremble, was shaking as he pressed his palm over the wound of the only woman he had ever loved. Stay with me, he begged, voice cracking.
Zola.
Stay with me. Please, God, stay with me. Sirens screamed somewhere in the distance. His men were shouting. None of it mattered. All that mattered was the woman bleeding out in his arms, the child inside her that he hadn't even known about until this second, until her other hand, instinctively, protectively, curled over her stomach. You didn't know, she whispered, and even now, bleeding, dying maybe, there was a flicker of that stubborn fire in her eyes. Did you? Zola. Say it, she breathed. Say you didn't know I was pregnant. I didn't know, he said, and it was the truest, most devastating sentence of his life. I swear on everything I am. Zola, I didn't know. Her eyes fluttered.
Closed. No.
No. Stay awake. Zola, before we begin, my mom said this video cannot reach 10,000 views and 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Smash that like button, subscribe right now, and drop in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's get into this story. 3 months earlier, Lieutenant Zola Akying had walked into a 5-star hotel bar in Busan wearing a red dress and an attitude that could start wars, and she had no idea her entire life was about to detonate. She'd flown in for a joint naval liaison assignment, 3 weeks in South Korea, coordinating anti-smuggling intelligence between the Kenyan and Korean navies. Boring meetings, translated paperwork, polite bowing. That was the plan. The plan did not include a devastatingly gorgeous Korean businessman sliding onto the bar stool beside her, ordering the same cocktail she had, and saying, in perfect if slightly stiff English, "You look like you're plotting something." I'm plotting my escape from a room full of admirals who think joint operation means let the woman take notes, Zola said, not even looking at him. You look like you're plotting a hostile takeover. Accurate, Sun Wu said, and when she finally turned to look at him properly, something in her chest simply short-circuited. That's a terrifying answer from a stranger at a bar. Sun Wukong. He extended a hand. Not that terrifying. Mostly boring meetings and spreadsheets. Zola Akying. She shook it and did not let go quite as fast as she should have. Lieutenant, Kenyan Navy. And I don't believe you, for 1 second, Mr. Kong. Boring men don't have a security detail pretending very badly to read newspapers by the exit. His mouth twitched, the first real, unguarded smile he'd given anyone in years. Sharp eyes. Sharp everything, actually, Zola said, sipping her drink, eyes glittering with mischief. You should probably be scared. I am, he said, and meant it more than she'd ever know, because Sun Wukong, who had buried enemies and negotiated with monsters without blinking, was already, hopelessly, dangerously, undone by a woman in a red dress who had no idea what world she'd just wandered into. That night began the fastest, most reckless, most magnetic month of both their lives. Neither of them could have imagined it would end with his bullet in her chest. Before we continue, my mom said this video cannot reach 10,000 views and 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Smash that like button, subscribe right now, and drop in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's continue the story. Zola should have flagged him after the first date. Every instinct she'd trained into muscle memory said a man with that much quiet control, that many silent men in dark suits orbiting him like moons, was not simply in imports and logistics, as he'd claimed over their first dinner. She flagged him anyway, mentally, and then ignored every single warning bell, because Sun Wukong made her laugh so hard she'd once snorted soju through her nose in front of an entire restaurant, and he hadn't laughed at her. He'd laughed with her, delighted, like she'd handed him something precious. "You're doing that thing," she told him on their fourth date, an evening market crawling with street food and lantern light, "where you look at me like I'm a puzzle you're trying to solve." "You are a puzzle," Sunwoo said, handing her a skewer of grilled meat he'd already haggled down in Korean too fast for her to follow. A loud, chaotic, terrifying puzzle. "Terrifying," she repeated, delighted. "I like that. Put that on my Navy file." Lieutenant Akyung, terrifying. "I would," he said, "but I don't have access to Navy files." "Sure you don't," she said, narrowing her eyes at him, and he only smiled, that maddening, secretive smile that made her want to shake answers out of him and kiss him senseless in the same breath. That was the thing about Sunwoo, he made her want contradictory things constantly. To interrogate him and to trust him blindly. To run from whatever darkness clung to his edges and to run straight into it, into him, without a single second thought. By week 3, she'd stopped pretending she wasn't falling. By week 4, standing on the rooftop of his penthouse with all of Seoul glittering beneath them like scattered gold, he'd gotten down on one knee with a ring he'd clearly bought that same afternoon in a panic and said, "I don't know how to do this slowly. I have never wanted anything slowly in my life, except you, and I can't even manage that. Marry me,
Zola.
Marry me before the Navy sends you home and I lose my mind." "That is," Zola said, laughing and crying at once, "the worst proposal I have ever heard." "Is that a yes?" "It's absolutely a yes, you disaster." They married 3 days later in Mombasa during her brief leave, telling no one. Not her commanding officers, not his family, not a soul, because Zola's deployment orders were classified and Sunwoo's world, though she didn't fully know it yet, was one that could get people killed simply for being associated with him. What she didn't know, that Sun Wukong wasn't just in logistics. That his father had built an empire trafficking in things far darker than imported goods, and that Sunwoo had spent a decade trying to drag that empire towards something almost legitimate, almost, while playing both sides of a war he never asked to inherit. What he didn't know, that Lieutenant Zola Akyung wasn't simply on a liaison assignment. That her superiors had flagged a Kong Holdings shipping route months before she ever sat at that bar, and that coincidence had never been the right word for how they'd met. Neither of them knew, that rooftop night, that they'd already set a collision course that no amount of love was going to be able to steer around. They found out 4 weeks later, in a warehouse full of guns, on opposite sides of a sting operation neither of them had chosen, each one horrified to see the other's face light up in a gun scope. Zola woke up to white light, the beeping of machines, and Sunwoo's face, gray, unshaven, wrecked, hovering over her like a man who hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't breathed properly in days. "You're awake," he choked out, and dropped his forehead to the edge of her hospital bed like his legs had simply given out. "Where?" Zola rasped, throat like sandpaper. "Is my baby?" "Fine." His voice broke on the word. "The baby's fine. You're both fine, Zola. You scared the absolute hell out of me." "Good," she said weakly, "because you shot your own wife, Sunwoo, so I think a little fear is fair." A wet, disbelieving laugh cracked out of him, grief and relief and love all tangled together. "There she is." "Don't there she is me." Zola tried to push herself up and winced, and immediately his hands were there, careful, steadying, terrified to touch her and unable to stop. You're the Mafia CEO my unit's been tracking for 6 months? I'm trying to burn that world to the ground, not build it, he said fiercely. My father built it. I inherited it. Every deal I've made for 3 years has been to dismantle the trafficking routes, redirect the money, get my people out clean. I was there that night to shut that shipment down, Zola, not to buy it. That's not what my report says. Your report is wrong. My report, Zola said, glaring even through her exhaustion, is written by people who don't know you kiss me like the world's ending every single time. So forgive me if I trust the report a little more than your face right now. Zola. I'm furious with you, she said, voice cracking despite the venom she was trying to load into it. You shot me. You almost. Her hand went to her stomach, and his followed instantly, gently, like he needed to feel their child's heartbeat under his palm to believe any of this was real. I will spend the rest of my life making that up to you, Sunwoo said. I mean that. I don't care what it costs me, my father's empire, my company, all of it. You and this baby are the only thing I'm not willing to lose. Zola studied him for a long moment, this ridiculous, terrifying, devastatingly sincere man who had somehow become her whole world in 4 reckless weeks. You're going to have to grovel a lot harder than that, she finally said, but I suppose I'll allow you to start with kissing me, since apparently that's the only thing you're good at. He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years, and kissed her slow and desperate and full of every terrified, grateful thing he couldn't say out loud, careful of the foreline, careful of her wound, utterly reckless with everything else. I love you, he murmured against her lips. I have loved you since the second you called me a hostile takeover. I know, Zola whispered back. I'm very lovable. Try to remember that next time you're pointing a gun at a warehouse. But even as she teased him, even as his forehead pressed to hers and his hand stayed warm and shaking over their unborn child, a nurse hovered anxiously in the doorway, and behind her, 2 men in dark navy dress uniforms Zola recognized instantly, faces grim. Lieutenant Akying, one of them said. We need to speak with you about your husband. Alone. Sunwoo went rigid. Whatever you have to say, Zola said, chin lifting even as pain lanced through her side. You can say in front of my husband. The senior officer, Commander Reyes, a man Zola had respected for 6 years, hesitated, then stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. Lieutenant, Kong Holdings' assets were seized 2 hours ago. Full federal task force. Korean and international authorities, working with our intelligence. Your husband is being named as the primary architect of a trafficking network spanning 3 continents. That's not, Zola started. There's more, Reyes said grimly, and something in his voice made her blood run cold. The order authorizing tonight's sting, the one that put you in that warehouse, pregnant, unarmed, in the direct line of fire, it wasn't standard operational protocol, Lieutenant. It was flagged as urgent, signed off same day, no normal review process. Meaning? Sunwoo's voice was low, dangerous, a tone Zola had never heard from him before. The tone, she realized with a chill, of the man underneath the man she'd fallen in love with. Reyes looked at Zola like he hated what he was about to say. Meaning someone wanted you in that building tonight, Lieutenant. Someone who knew exactly who you were to him. Zola's stomach dropped through the floor. Who? Reyes slid a folder onto the tray table beside her bed with the careful reluctance of a man defusing a bomb. Sunwoo opened it before she could, and his face, already gray from days without sleep, drained to something closer to ash. No, he breathed. What? Zola grabbed for it, ignoring the pull of stitches, and found herself staring at a surveillance photo. A woman in an elegant dress, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, standing beside a man Zola recognized instantly from every wedding photo Sunwoo had never shown her, his father. That's not my father, Sunwoo said hoarsely. That's my mother, Zola whispered, staring at the second face in the photo, a face achingly, impossibly familiar, a face she'd seen every day of her childhood before the woman vanished when Zola was 12 years old, supposedly dead, supposedly a casualty of a car accident that had shattered their entire family. That's my mother. She's alive. The folder trembled in Zola's hands. She's been alive this whole time, Zola said, voice shaking with a fury and grief too enormous to hold. Working with your father. Building the empire you're trying to destroy. Which means, Reyes said quietly, your marriage, Lieutenant. It may not have been the accident either of you believed it was. Sunwa's hand found Zola's, gripping it like a lifeline in a storm neither of them had seen coming, both of them staring at the photograph of two ghosts who had apparently orchestrated their entire love story from the shadows. The bar in Busan, the whirlwind month, the secret wedding, maybe even the bullet that had nearly taken her life and their child's. Sunwoo, Zola whispered, eyes locked on the woman she'd mourned for 15 years. What did our parents do to us? Outside the hospital room, the machines kept beeping steady, oblivious, but inside, the ground both of them had built their entire love on had just cracked wide open. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse office that was no longer legally Sunwa's, a phone began to ring with a number neither of them would ever guess. To be continued in Part 2.